I'm going to start by handing it off to Bryce Lewis-Smith and Jessica McCool. They are both part of the fifth assessment team, and they have brought other folks like co-authors with them. So thanks for being here, Bryce.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Oh, I just figured. I was like,
Yeah.
there's a mic here, there's a mic there.
Bojo Jayek, Bryce Nadeznikas, Bodwadmin Dao, Nishnavin Dao. My name is Bryce Lewis-Smith. I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I'm the Senior Tribal Research Engagement Specialist for the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, which means I manage our tribal research program of California's 5th Climate Change Assessment. I'll pass it to Jessica to introduce herself.
Thank you. This is almost too high for me. That's funny. Haku maktaka Jessica McCool, alap alahulapuni samala chumash ino. Hello, my name is Jessica McCool. I'm Samala Chumash from Santa Ynez, and I also serve on the 5th Assessment Team for the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation as a Research Engagement Associate. So I'm really focused on engaging communities. How are we disseminating the information that we're gathering with all of the research that we're doing, that we're going to be releasing soon with the 5th Assessment rollout next year. So we'll get more into that in the presentation. And I could pass it to Ben.
Hey, thanks. Ben McMahan with the Climate Services Program. I work really closely with the 5th Assessment Team. Climate Services is broadly thinking about that there's a lot of climate data out there, a lot of scientific research that's being done. And our general task is to think, how do we make this more usable and useful for communities, state agencies, local governments, and just to navigate that huge network of information and figure out what actually makes sense to use. And so I'll talk a little bit about today. I'm also located in San Diego County, so Bryce and Jessica invited me up to give a little chat. So also a local from the governor's office. So yes, thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Next slide, please. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about both the 5th Climate Change Assessment Tribal Research Program as well as the Vulnerable Communities Platform. I think we can actually go forward 2 slides now. Yes, great. So just a general introduction of California's 5th climate change. It's a suite of research that we're doing about the impacts of climate change to California's diverse communities across California. As you can see in the schematic, it is comprised of regional and topical reports, so 9 different regional reports specific to the regions across California. So there's a San Diego one, Los Angeles Inland Deserts, Central Coast, Sierra Nevada, and so forth, as well as 4 topical reports, including our Tribal and Indigenous Communities report, and a climate migration, racial equity, climate justice, and impacts to the economy report. This suite of research also has a lot of original research that we're funding across different universities and tribal communities to look into specific impacts of climate change as well. Next slide, please. So the 5th assessment is only the 2nd time that California's climate assessments have ever included tribal perspectives, right? The first time being done in 2018 during the 4th assessment, where Ron Good from North Fork was the lead author of the Tribal and Indigenous Communities report. And we also didn't have funding at that point too. So all of the authors and contributors to the 4th assessment volunteered their knowledge and their perspectives. And there were a lot of lessons learned about how we can better engage tribes in California's climate assessments moving forward. And through SB 1320, we got funding to not only pay our author teams, but create this entire tribal research program where we could bring on tribal advisory group members and pay them, create a specific tribal research grant program, provide funding for that, and pay our tribal report author team as well. And so, we created this tribal research program based off of the recommendations of the tribal authors from the 4th assessment. Next slide, please. So core to our tribal research program is our tribal advisory group, which is made up of 10 different representatives across California who were nominated by tribal leaders. We have one of these folks here today with us, Connor, in the back of the room. If you could just wave and say hello, from Paula. We're really grateful for all of the guidance that we get from our tribal advisory group. They don't necessarily replace the need for tribal consultation, but they play a role in helping us talk through what it does mean to embed tribal data sovereignty into the process of the fifth assessment. What does it mean to represent tribal communities, not only in the tribal and indigenous communities report, but throughout all aspects of the fifth assessment? So we're really grateful for the work that they have done, and yeah, just having them as thought partners to help lead us through this work. Next slide, please. We also have our Tribal Research Grant Program, which provides $3.6 million to 18 different tribal projects across California to work on anything that they've deemed as a climate priority. We do this in collaboration with the Energy Commission, and we've worked in this really cool iterative consenting process for this program as well. So we're not being prescriptive in telling the tribes what they need to do for their grant project, right? Because tribes know better than the state does of what their climate priorities are. And so we can't tell them what they need to do specifically about like fire resiliency or whatever. So yeah, and then we're also emphasizing this tribal self-determination and tribal sovereignty process through our iterative consenting practice, where the tribes have an option to share their findings within the fifth assessment. It's not a mandatory requirement of receiving this grant funding. And then once they've opted in, they get to monitor how we're talking about their research. And if we're doing that in a bad way, they get to opt out and take that information back and not share that within the fifth assessment. So really making sure that we're prioritizing being in good relationships with our tribal partners. And then our Tribal and Indigenous Communities report is led by Don Hankins this time around. He's a Plains and Miwok professor at CSU Chico. Some of y'all might know him. We also have a couple members of our author team here today. Donna, say hi. And then Teresa Greger as well. And Connor's on the team as well. And then Heather Daly as well. But I think she had to run for an event. But we're making sure that this report is really led by California tribal members for California tribes in general. But also this tribal report's not the only place where tribal perspectives are gonna be siloed within the report, right? We wanna make sure that each of the regional and other topical reports include tribal perspectives, so then state legislators and decision makers can't read the fifth assessment without engaging in tribal stories and narratives, right? It's so important for California's future to recognize that, we need that information. Next slide. That information for the future climate. Yeah. And so I'll pass it to Jessica to talk about our rollout.
Thank you. So now that we have all of this amazing work and knowledge put together in this assessment, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to disseminate it and message it to communities so they can actively be operationalizing the tools and resources that we're coming up with our different products? So as part of our culmination of the fifth assessment, we'll be having a big rollout event next year to celebrate all of the findings and accomplishments. We really want to incorporate tribal knowledge, center tribal voices. We want this to be collaborative, iterative, intergenerational, respectful, centering equity. And so that is our goal with it. And while we do want to have this one big celebratory moment for the assessment, we also want to have lots of ramp up events and ramp down events. So leading up to the rollout, how could we be maybe designing curricula or having workshops regionally, locally, so that we can engage with local communities on how to use some of these tools, how to use this information to update their hazard mitigation plans, to create hazard mitigation plans, emergency operations plans. And like I said, that roadshow will be leading up to the event and then following that main event. And we're hoping to engage in multiple ways to get ideas from our author teams, from our TAG members, our tribal advisory group that Bryce was mentioning, and then also having multiple engagement opportunities for the general public to share their ideas for how they want to see these events. So if you do have an idea of a regional or local event that we can have in your community, that we can have maybe an author come and share about their knowledge, or have a workshop talking about maybe one of the major climate risks in your areas. That could be one of our events that we have. And we do want to prioritize travel stipends, honoraria, and cultural celebrations for tribes. So just want to share more about our engagement coming up for the assessment. Would love to have y'all involved. And I'll pass it over to Ben.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and it's a great little handoff because the thing I'm going to talk about today is already using some of the data that's been produced as part of the fifth assessment and just thinking through how we can communicate that information and make it more useful and available. So the thing I'm going to talk about today is the Vulnerable Communities Platform, and I already mentioned that I'm part of the Climate Services Program, and that our role there is really to try to connect that science that's being produced with decision makers, planners, thinkers, thought partners, folks who might benefit from using that data or who might find that data to be useful, or maybe have some perspectives on how we can think a little differently about some of the information that's being produced. So the Vulnerable Communities Platform is this thing that integrates some of the climate data that's already been produced, that really thinks about three main questions: where different climate hazards are most severe, which communities are most vulnerable, and then what makes them most vulnerable. And again, the idea is there, how do we think about that information being most usable or most approachable? And there's two main aspects to the platform that I'll talk about today. And I'll just also mention, we did launch, I guess it was last month now because we're in November, but it's VCP, so vcp.lci.ca.gov, and encourage folks to check it out and also let us know what they are and are not finding is useful about it. But it has two main features that we think will be particularly useful for folks thinking about climate vulnerability. One is this mapping tool that lets you explore the landscape spatially of what are the different 5 climate hazards that might be most impactful. Extreme heat, wildfire, sea level rise, flooding, and then drought. And then there's this reporting tool that we're developing, which basically you can put in your location and get a report card or a little report out of what are the main issues that are facing your community, and then links out to some of the adaptation resources that have been developed. So there's the question of what is my community facing, and then there's the question of what might we be doing about it. And so the goal there is both to elevate some of the questions that we might be asking about climate vulnerability, but then pointing to some of those solutions. Next slide, please. So there's really 3 main users we see that could be potentially finding this useful, but then there's also a point of kind of feedback that I'd like to mention today that I think would be most helpful to raise. We do see that state and regional agencies may see this as a useful tool to help identify climate vulnerability and use that to prioritize adaptation investment for things like grant programs. So it's like, okay, if you're going to fund a wildfire project, it makes sense to look at the data as to where wildfire is most severe. If you're going to fund a drought project, let's think about the communities that are most impacted by drought. So I think that idea that it gives a broad overview of both the climate hazards and then the intersecting social vulnerabilities is kind of a key part of that. But another thing that we've been really focusing on is how do we make this information more useful and get it connected with, say, local organizations, local governments, community-based organizations who maybe don't have a climate scientist on staff or maybe don't have somebody dedicated to thinking that through. And so it's really designed to give this first pass picture of what are the key climate hazards that folks are facing, and then what are some of the adaptation solutions that they might be able to focus on. One of the ways that we're really trying to lean into that is this Climate Ready cohort plan that a colleague of mine is leading, which is really designed to say, okay, so you want to think about climate vulnerability, you want to use some of these tools, like what does that process look like? How do I use this? How do I do this? And then how could I maybe funnel that into a grant application or a policy program that I might want to work on? So it could be, a grant application for thinking about climate vulnerability, or it could be a climate adaptation plan that a local government might be focused on. Again, big picture there is there's a lot of information out there, and this is really designed to kind of curate and collate that into something that we see is more useful and accessible. And I guess with that, that's it. I think that's our last slide.